This is your Thursday and Friday lesson. So remember, we are going to continue looking at this particular standard, which is RI 4.5. I can explain the way a text is organized. Now you have the following in your packet. You have the order and sequence graphic organizer, and we're going to go over that in a few minutes. And you also have the order and sequence sheet that you're going to do independently. So that you do have in your packet. What you don't have is a story that I am about to read you. So before we begin, I want you to know that every story is told in order. When we're looking at text structures, we will often hear the word chronological order. This is the same as sequence and order. Sequence and order will be the last of the basic text structures that we cover this week. Remember, every story is told in order. Sequence and order uses keywords which will help us know that it is in sequence and order. Remember that this is also known as chronological order. So now let's review this particular graphic organizer. It states order and sequence. When authors want a reader to understand the order of events, they will use order and sequence. How could this graphic organizer help when describing the steps in baking cookies or the life of George Washington? Here are some clue words that you can use. Clue words: dates in order. It'll use the words first, second, third, before, after, next, finally, last, meanwhile, during, etc. Order and sequence can also be called chronology, time order, or chronological order. So this story, George Washington, is the one that I'm going to read to you. You don't have it in your packet. I honestly forgot to have it printed. So it states, and just pay attention to the dates, words that show transition, and time order, and different things like that. So this is what it states. And then we're going to answer some questions. George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia. He lived with his family on Little Hunting Creek Plantation, which was later renamed Mount Vernon. George was homeschooled until he was 16 years old, learning English and Latin and also studying math, geography, and surveying. This was helpful because he went to work as a surveyor, plotting land in Virginia's western areas, and a year later, in 1749, George was appointed official surveyor for Culpeper County, Virginia. In 1754, George Washington's brother and guardian, Lawrence, died. This left 20-year-old George to inherit all of the Washington lands and homes, including Mount Vernon, which was now one of the most prominent estates in Virginia. During this time, the colonies were still under British rule. The French and Indian War had begun, and Washington had been given the honorary rank of colonel with the British Army. For the next several years, he and his men fought bravely in battles against the French soldiers in order to reclaim their forts and land. After the French and Indian War ended in 1758, Washington retired from his Virginia regiment in the Army and returned home to Mount Vernon. He married Martha Curtis and began developing his land holdings, taking care of his crops, and managing the livestock. He was devoted to his land and to his new family. During this time, Washington also served in Virginia's House of Burgesses, which is similar to our Senate today. The representatives met and discussed laws and orders that were being passed down from Great Britain. After the British Proclamation Act of 1763 prohibited further settlement, and the Stamp Act of 1765 required all colonists to pay a tax for every piece of paper they used, Washington and his fellow representatives felt that the colonies were being treated unfairly. So they began to fight for their rights against the British. This was the start of the American Revolution. In 1775, George Washington was appointed General of the Continental Army, and the war began. His armies were untrained, constantly low on food and supplies, and sometimes even marched into battle without shoes. Despite the odds, he and his troops fought against trained British soldiers with heart. He led a successful ambush in 1776, the Battle of Trenton, and a victory over Valley Forge in 1777. Washington and his armies fought on for more than 6 years, ending in triumph over the British in October of 1781 at Yorktown. Washington returned home in 1783 and returned to the life of a landowner. He worked to repair his neglected lands and became prosperous once again. He enjoyed the life of a farmer until he was called upon again for service in 1787, when he would work with the other founding fathers to rewrite the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution of the United States. Finally, in 1789, George Washington would be unanimously voted as the first president of the United States, and the rest, they say, is history. Now, he is remembered as the father of our nation and will always be remembered for the role he played in the birth of the United States of America. Now, this story was one of those stories that was told in chronological order. And if you remember us doing the Wheatley, we talked about George, Can't You Make Them Behave, and some different things like that. And you heard about the Stamp Act and the Patriot Act, and it has sequential order. So thinking about this, we're going to now answer some questions. Again, you don't have this in your packet, but let's go ahead and proceed with answering some questions. Now again, this story was told in chronological, also known as sequence and order. So here we are. And we could always refer back to the text if you had it in front of you, but you don't. So let me just help you out with that. So George Washington questions, what was Washington's first rank in the Army? Okay, so if I needed to, I could go back, reread the text, and I would choose the answer B. He was a colonel. Number 2, when did the Revolutionary War begin? Again, referring back to my text, I can see that the Revolutionary War began in 1775. Number 3, why was it hard for Washington's troops during the Revolutionary War? Underline details that support your answer in red. So I remember when I read the text, it stated that they were not trained and that they did not have enough food or supplies. So I would underline those two things in red. And then it states, number 4, identify the overall structure of the text by completing the chart. I know that this was order and sequence or chronological order. And then it states here clues that helped me. They gave me dates. They gave me some information about his age. They told me about his brother dying. So that helped me know that this was chronological order. And then the last question is, which 2 events led George Washington and his fellow leaders to seek freedom from Britain? And I can look back to my text, and it states here, underline the details that support your answer in blue. Those 2 events that occurred were the Proclamation Act and the Stamp Act. So your task for today, Thursday, is to create your own order and sequence. Anything that you like. So choose a topic. If you like, give us a little introduction, and then start telling us the story. Make sure you use those transition words. First, second, third. Remember how some of you like to make slime? That could be something that you could write about. If you know how to make tacos, write about it. Just remember, it's important to use those transition words for this one. That's going to be your independent practice. So now we have covered all of the basic structures. Okay, we've done description, compare and contrast, order and sequence, also known as chronological order, cause and effect, problem and solution. And you still have this paper to be able to refer to. Your task for Friday is you're going to match some task cards. Let me show you what they look like. So on the paper that you have in your packet, you have 12 of these. I only need you to choose 10. So you read the nonfiction text structure and you decide which text structure is used in the paragraph. So take number 1 for example. It states, the Vancouver Island marmot is a kind of large rodent that lives high in the mountains of Vancouver Island in Canada. Climate change and logging have caused a large decrease in their population. Scientists believe that there are less than 100 of them left in the wild. So thinking about this, what text structure is used in the paragraph? Is it compare and contrast? And let's just do a process of elimination. We'll probably eliminate compare and contrast because they didn't talk about two things at all. Okay? Let's look at description. Possibly because they did describe this marmot as being a large kind of rodent, so let's just set that one aside and see. Could it be cause and effect? Well, they did tell us that the climate change and the logging have caused a large decrease in the population. So now we're going to set aside B and C, and then let's look at D. Is it sequence? No, I don't see any dates or time order or anything like that. So now let me go back. I said it's going to be either B or C. If I'm looking at this, what did they talk about mostly? They talked about mostly C, that the climate change and logging have caused a large decrease in their population. And then it went on to mention what the scientists were doing and saying about it. So I've eliminated everything, and my best answer for that one would be cause and effect. So now you're going to choose 10 of these to complete on your own to show us that you know how to use nonfiction text structures. Now our goal for this week was that you be able to say that you can explain the way a text is organized. You could explain the way a text is organized. We looked at the basic text features, okay? And I do want you to know that every story is in chronological order. And authors use structure, text structure, to make sure that we know the reason of the writing and different things like that, okay? So just like we learned that a house and an apartment building, even though there are two buildings, their structures are definitely different and they serve different purposes, okay? So keep reading and see what text features and text structures you understand in your reading. Looking forward.